This week on the show, we've got all sorts of goodies to discuss, starting with VMM, vkernels, Raspberry Pi, and much more. Also, some IX folks are visiting from out of town. Maybe somebody's just going to wander in here. Who knows? Stick around. It's time for your place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 164, Virtualized COW Pi? What? Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you folks with us this week. We had another exciting episode. Oh, I forgot to mention the date, but I'll just throw that in there. Yes, it's October 19th, by the way, for those keeping score at home. So not that that's going to change anything in the episode, of course. So we are here this week. Only a few short weeks left till Meet BSD happens, which we'll, of course, try and leave you guys with a cool interview so you can watch something while we're gone. But if you haven't made your plans, please start doing so. Yes. Only a few short weeks left.
Yeah, not much time left, and you already missed the discount. So hurry up.
That's right.
We've been telling you for a while.
Hurry up. No more excuses. All right, well, let's hop right into the news here, Alan. So it looks like we got some virtualization news to talk about, specifically on the OpenBSD side. So what are they doing?
Yes, so with the commit that went in the other day, OpenBSD now has their hypervisor, VMM, which we've talked a little bit about over the last year or so since they started working on it. Yep. But it's officially in their tree now rather than just a set of patches.
Nice. Okay.
And they say, that's been a lot of work by Mike Larkin and Rake Fleuter and a bunch of other people. But now they have VMM, although their version, like Beehive, requires an Intel Nehalem or later processor with the virtualization features enabled in the BIOS. And currently, they only support OpenBSD as a guest.
Well, that's how we started on the FreeBSD side, too. It takes a little while to get everything else working.
Well, so it's also...
Don't let that scare you away yet.
It's much easier to debug the boot process of an operating system you know the boot process of.
Yes, that's true. That is very true. Well, great. So it looks like they still haven't done the AMD work yet.
So they haven't started that yet. They intend to do it at some point, but it's not clear when that'll start and so on. But... we'd really be interested in hearing from any viewers that maybe have tried it or maybe will try it after this episode and letting us know, where are the rough spots, how does it go when you try it, what stuff still needs work to be usable and so on. But it looks like it could be interesting.
Nice. Yeah, that definitely looks good. So give it a whirl and let us know. We want to hear some feedback on it. Okay, so moving on. So part of the title we mentioned was a cow. In this case, we're talking about copy on, right? Not the type you make burgers out of. Sorry to my vegan friends and vegetarian friends. The kind I enjoy burgers from. But anyway, we're talking about vkernels, though. Dragonfly has a new thing. Or it looks like kernels have copy on write functionality. So what exactly does that mean? I was confused when I first saw that, Alan, until I dug into it.
Vkernels are the feature that Dragonfly has. I don't know that much about them. But basically, it's... something kind of like Jails, except for you have a virtualized kernel rather than just the userland side. But they've been able to work off these disk images for a while, but now they support copy on write functionality. So you can, with this new feature, you can boot multiple vkernels off the same image. And if you met the images read-only or whatever, then any changes made to the image are kept, but are not written to the original image file.
So kind of like a Union FS type thing for kernels?
It says here that note that when the vkernel operates on an image in this mode, modifications will eat up system memory and swap. So the user should be cognizant of this use case. So yes, that means that basically you can boot many vkernels off the same image and they won't modify the image. They'll keep track of any local changes in memory. They say... the flexibility of being able to mount the image rewrite should not be underestimated, although I don't know exactly what they mean there.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from maybe some of our listeners or Dragonfly developer. Maybe somebody should come on the show and tell us about this. I'm kind of curious to hear what the use case is for this, because this sounds like I don't know, almost a virtualization type thing. I don't know.
It's like a different take on the light virtualization of something like Jails, but with trying to get more VM-like features of, my image is static and I'm storing my changes in a separate file, which I can then maybe merge, maybe not kind of thing.
Okay, well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, seems interesting.
Okay, well, we'll have to bring you more information on that as we find out, because even
Yes.
this is new to us, so we're glad to bring share it with
But,
you guys, and if there's any subject matter experts who want to come on and clarify,
exactly.
please let us know.
Like you were saying, it'd be really helpful if somebody that does know about vkernels or is actually trying this out wrote in and told us a little bit about it, so we could find out more.
That would be cool. Okay, so basic support for Raspberry Pi 3. Of course, a lot of us have been waiting for quite a while for this, but the bits have just landed to allow FreeBSD to boot on the Raspberry Pi 3. I know we've kind of mentioned this in passing in the last couple months, but there's still a lot of work to be done, so this isn't by any means complete. We have a little quote here from Alexander's blog post where he talks about it. He says, the Raspberry Pi 3's limited support was committed to head. Most of the drivers should work with upstream. RNG, however, the random number generator, requires some attention because callout mode seems to be broken, and there's no IRQ in the upstream device tree file. SMP is also a work in progress. I assume that means it's still running on one core like previously. There's also some compatibility issues with the VCH IQ driver due to some assumptions that are true only for the ARM platform. So, and that's the driver which I think he uses to do video core for frame buffer, and then of course sound as well. So those things are not working yet. This is very exciting though to see that this has finally gone in and landed. So of course no HDMI support just yet. So if you have your little shiny Raspberry Pi 3, which I got mine just the other day in anticipation of this work, actually. Very excited. You can go ahead and start playing with this, but you'll have to make sure you have your USB to serial adapter cable handy and ready to go, because that's how you're going to talk to it initially. It sounds like I think the network card's working, though. I think that USB driver is the same from the two. I could be wrong on that, but I'm fairly sure that's good to go. So, of course, we have a link here. Full instructions on how to get started with it can be found in the FreeBSD wiki. Yeah. A little bit different process, but 90% the same.
Yeah. So there's not pre-built images yet, but building your own image is not that complicated. They also have the to-do list here, and it shows that SMP support is being worked on. Crochet support is actually complete, so you could also use that to develop the image. The U-boot port is now done. They're working on, Sean Webb's working on getting it to work with the newest Clang 3.9.0. Wi-Fi support hasn't been started yet because that depends on the SDIO support, which isn't done yet. And no one is currently volunteered to do the Bluetooth support, but working on it.
Yeah, Sean mentions here, indeed, the network card is working, so that's good. Okay.
So basically you just need the firmware off the Raspberry Pi GitHub, and then grab U-boot and a config file for it, and then you install the AArch64 bin utils, which is a cross-tools thing to let you compile for ARM64 on not ARM64. And basically you can just do build world, build kernel with target equals ARM64, and it'll build you a single processor kernel for your ARM64. And then it's just a matter of creating your SD card and putting the right stuff on it. And then
putting the U-boot files on it and such.
And then your built world, your install world into it, and then you're done. And you have an image you can boot off your Raspberry Pi. And then they have a D message here to show you what it should look like.
Very cool. Very cool. So, of course, eventually we'll see RaspBSD will probably make some images here soon, and official FreeBSD images, I would imagine, will follow as well. So we're keeping an eye on this. This is exciting stuff. I've been looking forward to it. We have a bunch of 2s here, for example, and it's getting harder and harder to find those because I don't think they're in production anymore.
What's interesting is they've started making it, I think they call it a 2 Plus or something, which is like a Raspberry Pi 3, but with a couple of the bits.
With the older ARM?
They just like underclocked the CPU and a couple things to make it like a Raspberry Pi 2. But most of the hardware is from the 3 because it's actually cheaper for them to just make a dumbed down version of the 3 than it is to try to keep producing the old model.
Oh, that makes sense. That's interesting. I'll have to take a look and see if I can
the downside is that...
Is it the ARM64 chip, though? I think it still doesn't have support, right?
Yeah. So it's part of the problem is that not all the newer hardware is actually supported yet. But
okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so our last story at the top of the news here, we have OpenBSD switching soft-RAID crypto from PKC S5 to PBK DF2. Man, I love all the acronyms the crypto guys come up with. To bcrypt PBK DF. Yeah. So, okay, tell us, what does that mean, Alan? That's a mouthful.
Right. So the way the master key that's used to encrypt and decrypt your hard drive is stored is actually encrypted. And then your passphrase is what's used to decrypt that. But your passphrase isn't a good enough key for encryption. So it goes through this password-based key derivation function, which basically takes your password and makes it into a stronger key. And we use many iterations of this in order to make it even stronger. However, as we saw from that blog post a couple of weeks ago, where a user typoed their
Reversed
password.
his full disk.
Yeah,
Yep.
so he typoed his password, so he built a tool to brute force it. Now, it was easier for him because he just had to take his password and do a bunch of the variations of it. He didn't have to try to brute force the entire possibility set of passwords. He knew, it contains these words, but I typoed somewhere in there.
Sure.
But that
It roughly looks like this.
But that kind of brought to light the fact that OpenBSD defaulted to just 8,000 or 8192 iterations of PKCSV5 as their key derivation function, and they were using a SHA-1 HMAC. So that number of iterations can be manually controlled, but that was the default.
Sure.
Whereas by comparison, FreeBSD's Geli uses the same PKCSV5, but it does a SHA-512 HMAC, and it uses a benchmark to decide how many iterations are needed for your CPU.
Sure.
And it basically did a benchmark to find a number that would take at least 2 seconds to compute. So on modernish hardware like my laptop, again, this is single core, that came out to a number of about 2 million, or 1 or 2 million, depending on the hardware.
Sure.
So, 1 million versus 8,000, it's like, that's a big difference. It's the problem with using a magic number. 8192 made sense when software was
When it
set
was
up.
set.
But, you'd have to constantly keep bumping it up as hardware got newer. But it turns out the FreeBSD one isn't perfect either. An inefficiency in the implementation of PKCSV5 means that it does the SHA-512 from the beginning each time, so it's actually 50% slower than it needs to be. So that means an attacker could use the more efficient algorithm and only take about 1 second per
Cut
attempt.
the time in half.
Right.
Yeah.
But, still 1 second per attempt, if they have to attempt billions of attempts, is really going to slow them down. But, it's half the intended time. So there's a patch out for review originally submitted by someone who discovered this problem with a bunch of PKCS implementations and presented that at a conference. He submitted a patch. Somebody from FreeBSD added some tests and so on. And then it kind of, they ran out of time to work on it. And in that meantime, FreeBSD changed a bit. So I've been cleaning it up and getting it ready to go in. Anyway, so with this change to OpenBSD, they've changed their default key derivation function to be bcrypt based, which is much stronger. And they upgraded to the SHA-512 HMAC like FreeBSD uses. So this will make it much stronger. They also switched to the benchmark method. So what they actually do is, in FreeBSD, the way it does it is it benchmarks a certain number and keeps increasing the number of iterations, like doubling the number of iterations until it takes more than 2 seconds. The way they did it in OpenBSD was do one really complicated loop of 100 iterations of bcrypt, because bcrypt is it takes a lot longer. So 100 is actually a big number. So they do 100 iterations of bcrypt, figure out how long that takes, and then divide 1 second by how long that took, and basically scale to figure out a number of iterations that will take about 1 second.
That's cool.
Anyway, so yeah, they target about 1 second per iteration or per key, and they do that, and so that should make it much better.
Well, the nice thing about the bcrypt too is it's also a little bit more resilient, of course, against ASIC and GPU.
Yeah.
So if you've ever done Bitcoin mining, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, if you've ever tried to crack hash passwords, like a SHA-512, even you can get a good rate out of a video card. But when you try bcrypt, not so much. So they say here, new volumes will be created using bcrypt. However, existing volumes will continue to use the old PKCSV5. If you want to force it to the new one, change your password, even to the same password, but it'll redo it and set it up as bcrypt. But yeah, like you were saying, if you read the Wikipedia page for the password-based key derivation functions, they say, one weakness of PBKDF2 is that while the number of iterations can be adjusted to make it take an arbitrarily large amount of computing time, it can be implemented with a small circuit and very little RAM, which makes brute force attempts using application-specific integrated circuits, or ASICs, or graphics cards relatively cheap. On the other hand, bcrypt's key derivation function requires a much larger amount of RAM, but that can't. So while the amount of CPU can be tuned, the amount of RAM can't with bcrypt. So it's still not perfect, but we've
better.
We've definitely
it's
seen
just another step
from benchmarks and so on.
Another weapon in the war, right?
We've definitely seen from benchmarks and so on that bcrypt resists being cracked on a GPU a lot more. On the other hand, something even more modern like scrypt's key derivation function, which uses an arbitrarily large amount of memory instead of CPU, specifically to make it more resistant to ASIC and GPU attacks. So maybe in the future, FreeBSD's Geli will switch to scrypt because it will use an amount of memory instead of an amount of CPU that is scalable. So you keep tweaking up the amount of memory it's going to use, and this way, you can build ASICs that are really good at doing one function really fast, but in the end, RAM costs the amount that RAM costs, and you can't cheat at RAM where like you can with CPU by designing a specific CPU to do this one operation faster. So the upgrade to bcrypt, which is proven to be resilient, is going to be a big upgrade for OpenBSD, and it should be pretty good.
I will need to pull up a chair. We have a surprise guest today, which I was going to mention in the cold open. But yes, we have some folks from IX with us. So give us a moment to get set up, and we'll be right with Josh here. Okay, folks. So, of course, we have an interview today. We had a guest wander in, but we need to mention real quick before we start talking about it. IX Systems, of course, has been a sponsor here forever, I think, in a day, right? I think our first sponsor. So, of course, IX Systems is still doing a lot of cool stuff with their FreeNAS and TrueNAS products. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that here in a minute. But we have a few of them out at the Tennessee office today, and I guess you're doing some support training. Is that what's going on?
Yep.
Okay. So good stuff. Of course, IX Systems, you've heard us every week, so you pretty much know the story, but I'll mention the website, of course, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Go there and you can get in touch with our sales engineers, and who knows, maybe someday you'll be graced with the privilege of talking to Mr. Petzel here himself. Although you do some pretty tricky support things, so maybe it's better if they don't talk to you. Right?
Yes, Josh is who you want in an emergency, but you hope you never, ever, ever need to talk to Josh.
That's right. That's right. He's like that really good heart surgeon. It's good to know him, but you hope you never have to call him, right? But anyway, hey, first of all, thanks for coming on the show today, Josh.
Sure thing.
Appreciate you
and
taking the time.
Nice to step by. I think it's been a while since I've been on. This might be my third appearance.
I think it's your third. The first time we had the Christmas Santa Claus.
This might actually be number 4 then. Because
really?
you did Santa Claus one time and another time, and then we did ones from after you moved. So I think this might be number 4. Maybe 3, but I think maybe 4.
That works.
One of my favorite
guests. When we got him in person, live and in the flesh, we'll do it. So, okay, Josh. So tell us a little about what's going on, I guess, over in IX Systems land. I know.
Well, I know they're busy working on MeetBSD, getting that conference put together, and a lot of work going into that. That's something we hold every other year. I think there might be a sister conference to it that happens in Europe on the odd number of years, but maybe that doesn't happen anymore.
Well, VBSD is still kind of
so there was supposed to be a version of MeetBSD in Poland every year on the years that it wasn't in California, but that kind of dried up, and in its place now we have VBSDCon, which will be happening September of 2017. They've already got the dates.
Yeah, that's Virginia, right? I haven't ever had a chance to make it out to that one, but I wanted to go
to that one.
Yeah, it's always just been a timing thing. It's never.
Well, they've announced the date for 2017 already, so you now have a year to plan.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't plan anything till the last minute, so we'll see. If I'm free the weekend before, maybe I'll get a chance to go. Right?
There you go.
We'll see. It's always tough to say. Yeah. So this is the fourth MeetBSD. Yeah.
I think
let's see. Is that Google, Yahoo,
Hitachi,
HGST? Yeah. And I think this one.
There was one at the Hacker Dojo or something.
Hacker Dojo.
That's right. This is the fifth.
Because this will be my third.
2008, 10, 12, 14. Yeah.
So
16.
tell us what's special about the venue of this one.
I don't know anything about the venue. I think it's being held. I'm staying somewhere in Oakland. I think it's in Berkeley.
It's at Berkeley.
That's nice.
It's actually
nice. Yeah.
On the campus.
It all started, right?
It's on the campus where BSD originally started.
Nice.
So that's going to be fun. I mean, that's not something you get to do every year.
No, it's not. And, for some of us, for the true believers, so to speak, right, we'll be walking around, Berkeley talking in hushed tones.
Right.
And, here's the Kirk's office.
Kirk's old chair.
Is this filing cabinet still here? Like, and other people will just be like,
That's just another college campus. Yeah.
So we'll see. But it's pretty exciting. I remember one year, Devin Teskey took me around Berkeley and showed me all around the campus while he was up there. It was pretty awe-inspiring for a farm kid from Minnesota to think that someday I'd
you'd walk the
go there
halls.
and go to Walnut Creek and be like, that's a real place, not just the name of a company, and meet some of these people. So that's been pretty exciting. So we're looking forward to that. I know there's going to be a ZFS panel.
Yes. So they did a poll to decide what birds of a feather sessions they should have, and ZFS was so far in front, we decided to make that more of a panel type thing, and then so that we could get people to break up into smaller groups so that you can have more conversation like thing instead of everybody going to ZFS and the other rooms being empty.
Are you working the panel?
I think so. I think Alan is.
Yes, it should be me, Josh, hopefully Matt Aarons, and maybe a couple other people that can answer questions about ZFS. And we'll just have people, everybody can ask their questions of our little panel of experts, and hopefully we can, share some more information about ZFS.
That much brain power in a room at Berkeley. This is an opportunity that isn't going to repeat itself probably in the future. I mean, very rare. So if you can make it out, by all means,
I think that'll be fun. I always enjoy chances to talk to Matt Aarons and Alan both. So
are you going to be doing any stunts this year? Because I remember, was it a couple years ago where you did the pulling drives out of the system to see how far we could go?
I haven't even gotten that far.
Okay.
That was kind of a fun one, wasn't it? The crazy thing about that. Now, there's an interesting story about that. So I brought many different ways to destroy hard drives with me, for that stunt. My intention was that there would be a lot of different ways to destroy hard drives. Sure. And the sort of the coup d'etat, the piece de resistance, I had my oxyacetylene torch with me. And I was going to let people blow holes through them with the torch, right? And the HGST security people, no, absolutely not. And I was like, we'll have a bucket of water. I mean, it's perfectly safe. And absolutely not. And so they didn't let me bring that in. And so to me, the hammer, I was like, if I'd known the hammer would be so popular, I would have brought a bigger hammer.
Or something. A selection of hammers.
Yeah. So unfortunately, my intention was the blowtorch was going to be the thing everybody wanted to do, right?
And you had like a Tesla coil or something too, didn't you?
I did, and unfortunately, it was a pretty weak one.
Yeah,
so I'd like to reprise that, but I don't know. And maybe the world will move upward and onward. Maybe we'll do something. I haven't even thought about it. So we'll see. We'll try and do something.
Send your suggestions in to Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. If we have time to do it, that'd be kind of fun.
Well, for those who don't know what he's referring to, just go look it up. The visual of seeing Kirk McCusick wailing on a hard drive with a hammer.
Yes, I think the video on YouTube is actually called Kirk Tries Out Hammer FS.
Yeah, right? It is, yeah. Talk about taking out some pent-up frustrations, right?
Oh, yeah. Years of my life gone!
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, good
stuff. It should be fun.
Okay.
It should be fun. Looking forward to it. So, yeah.
Very
like
cool.
I said, the hush. We'll see who talks in hushed tones when they.
Well, and I know the after party is at Kirk's favorite venue, just up the hill from his house, and so that should be fun.
I hope so. Yeah. I've been to some pretty rough after parties for FreeBSD. So hopefully this one will be a little more appropriate for the types of people that will be there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I remember the 20th anniversary party. The music was so loud I couldn't talk to anybody. That kind of killed the buzz a little bit.
That was a little rough.
Yeah.
That's all right.
That's all good. It's all good. But hey, you gotta go to have these fun experiences and the stories to share afterwards.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I wasn't at the FreeBSD 10th anniversary party. That was in Monterey. I wasn't at that one. I was at the 15th. And I won't tell you the name of someone who took their shirt off and danced on a table, but it was not a pretty sight. It was not a pretty sight. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Anyways.
Yeah. Good times. Good times. All right, so tell us a little about what's going on. Of course, Josh works very heavily with FreeNAS and TrueNAS at IX Systems. So I guess any new stuff pending there?
Well, we're trying to get another dot release of FreeNAS and TrueNAS out the door yet this year. And so we've collaborated some with the FreeNAS 10 team and brought in some of the features of that. One of the things that's really bothered me about FreeNAS for about 6 years now, or maybe 5 years, is the way that making changes to the network would restart the entire networking stack. So, for instance, if you go to add a VLAN to a FreeNAS system, something that should be completely non-disruptive, it would tear down the entire networking stack and restart it, interrupting all of your connections. And that's something that will finally be surfacing in 9.10.2, is the ability to dynamically compare your running config to what you want to do and just apply the changes in the least disruptive way possible. So I'm really looking forward to that. But that's also just sort of a technology proof of concept that the technology underlying it is solid, because then we'll be using that functionality to do a lot more.
Sure. Build on
so, we're some possible areas that we could be looking at would be things like the LDAP and Active Directory integration, starting to use that, and just some pieces that could really make FreeNAS quite a bit more robust than it is today, and less fragile, less able, less prone to tipping over when you change it. It's solid, it works very well, but it does not always respond gracefully to changes in a lot of different ways. So that'll be something that'll be pretty interesting to see. And then, moving on through the future, we do have another dot release that we're hoping to get out, early in the spring. I'm not even sure we've completely dialed in the feature list for that. Yeah, we haven't quite set
the feature list yet.
So but
things come up. If you're a heavy FreeNAS or TrueNAS user, send in ideas if there's something that you're really stumbling on.
Yeah, for sure. So that'll be something. In fact, we're working on a TrueNAS release, just a bug fix release. Should go out on Monday. So trying to get that dialed in. And meanwhile, I'm trying to focus my attention on the support guys. And so I'm trying to let them get that done by themselves and only getting involved when I have to. But
he's the guy they wheel out when it's like the problem nobody can solve. Bring in the pencil.
It's terrifying.
It's good stuff, though. All right, so we heard you had an interesting little story to tell us about. Yeah, you always have good customer stories, things you run across in the field. So.
Yeah, I sit in on the support meetings at IX Systems every day, and I call it keeping my finger on the pulse of mayhem. And there was one that came through a couple of weeks ago that they were unable to get the serial console working on a system running FreeBSD, and the support guys were kind of struggling with that a little bit. But they were using Pixie Boot, and I've been using FreeBSD and Pixie Boot and very familiar with that for many, many, many years. And so I said, well, maybe I'll take a look at it. And so I looked at it, and it turned out it was the FreeBSD Foundation was the customer. And it was just a new Supermicro server that they shipped them, and they couldn't get the serial console working. And so So I had the name on the ticket was the FreeBSD Foundation, and I had a phone number, so I called it, and Sean Bruno answered the phone. And I said, hey, Sean. So we talked for a while. We had both left the Bay about the same time. He's living in New Mexico now, and so we talked for a while, and this and that. So then we finally got to the point where we were ready to actually work on something. So we took a look at it. It turned out that the system, it wasn't that the serial console wasn't working, it's that the system wasn't booting. And so it would go through the BIOS screen, and it would go through the loader, and then it would just stop. And he assumed that, or at least thought, hey, the serial console is tipping over. But upon further investigation, we found out the system just wasn't booting. And so we did more and more investigation. We started ruling things out, and eventually we got to the point of TCP dumping the Pixie boot server to see what was really going on. And we could see it load the loader and Pixie boot code and load the kernel and then just stop. And so it was sending DHCP requests and getting an IP, and then it would go to do its NFS mount, and it would do the RPCs to get the mount information, and it was acting like it wasn't getting the responses. Like it would, send out the RPC, tell me about all your mounts, and the server would be, here's all my mounts, and well, tell me about all your mounts. And so here's my mounts.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell me about all your mounts? And that was the conversation that's happening, and it would just stop. And so just on a whim, Sean changed it to use a static DHCP reservation instead of an IP from a dynamic pool, and it booted just fine. Full OS boot. So then we swapped the server out with a different server on the same switch port, same DHCP server, same thing, and it booted just fine with a dynamic IP and a static IP. And so there's something about that hardware that it really doesn't want to use a dynamic IP, I guess. But you know, what difference it would make from a static DHCP reservation to a dynamic IP. So Sean muttered something about talking to Peter Wem, and and then a couple days later he told me he had a desk flip moment when he found out that somebody knew about this for 2 months. So
I hate those kind of problems.
But we did get the system booting with the serial console. So I still need to follow up with them and see if I can see what the actual problem is, because now I'm curious.
Yeah.
The crazy thing about this system is our burn-in environment is all Pixie boot. And so this system went through our burn environment and passed.
Sure.
And burned in. I pulled the logs. It Pixie booted just fine. We have the same exact, serial console, all this stuff. And so, of course, we're back a couple versions of FreeBSD. He was trying to boot FreeBSD 11 stable or something like that. And
12. It was the latest 12 because they're using those machines for building packages.
Well, the Pixie boot that was failing was 11.
Okay.
But maybe that was just a proof of concept for them, or that's when I get involved. Maybe they started with 12. Our burn-in environment runs 10.2, I think. It's not even running the latest 10. So yeah, who knows?
Bizarre.
Serial console works now, I guess. So, anyways, so it was an interesting breakage, but that's usually when we get called in, is when there's something that is weird enough that it can't be fixed by,
Sure. Mere mortals.
Yeah, I guess, right?
Well, so we have you here, and we got to use this opportunity. So we have, of course, a lot of viewers who run FreeNAS.
Okay.
Right? So I'm sure there's got to be some little nuggets of FreeNAS wisdom you can impart upon our viewers. Best practices. Hey, I'm setting up a FreeNAS box. Should I do X, Y, Z?
Well, I mean, the first thing I guess I'd talk about is the Easter eggs in FreeNAS. I don't know if anybody knows there's Easter eggs in FreeNAS.
Oh, okay.
So from the development team, did you know?
No,
Alan?
I didn't know.
There's a couple there, yeah. So from the development team, long years ago, we decided that FreeNAS release we were going to be adding cowbell to FreeNAS, and so the more cowbell sketch from Saturday Night Live has always sort of been our motto. I have the same type of cowbell that they used on that skit. I went out and bought one. I don't have the cowbell that they used, but I have the same type. I have a T-shirt that Matt Olander, who's the CTO of IX Systems at the time, his wife had a T-shirt made that says "No More Cowbell" across it, and so I'd wear that on release day. And so that's always sort of been our unofficial motto. We're adding more cowbell to FreeNAS, right? So a lot of the Easter eggs in FreeNAS are centered around the more cowbell theme. And for instance, the updater in FreeNAS, the command is called FreeNAS update, and there's undocumented command flags that you can pass to it that will get it to spit out lines from the skit.
Really?
It's like, really explore the space. We're checking for updates and things like that, So if you're looking for Easter eggs in FreeNAS, search around for some cowbell. And remember, the source code is Python for the most part for the web UI and middleware and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy to read through and find. So I guess that'd be my first step. I'm always about the Easter eggs. So, in terms of usage on FreeNAS, I think it's becoming more and more apparent to us that latency sensitive workloads, IOPS sensitive workloads, are really ZFS RAID 10 is really the way to go on that. And for things where you're looking for ultimate data protection and integrity, or if you have a non-latency sensitive workload and you're looking to maximize your sequential transfers, whether they're reads or writes, RAID Z2
sure
is a good option. one of the things I think that people get really nervous about is building large RAID 10 arrays. What do you do when you want to build a RAID 10 array and you have 300 disks?
Oh, yeah.
Is it safe to build a system with 150 mirrors? And there's ZFS allows you to do three-way mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is an option to give you. It's very, very expensive in terms of you're using 66% of your storage space is for redundancy.
Sure.
And that's an expensive option, and not a lot of people have the sort of budget to allow them to do that. We've run some very, very, very large pools that are both RAID Z2 and RAID 10. And, over the years, we've never lost either type of pool. We've never lost a RAID Z2 pool due to hardware failures, including systems that have 200 or 300 disks with 10 drive RAID Z2 VDEVs. We've also never lost a RAID 10 pool due to failures. And certainly when you're rebuilding a system with 200 mirrors, it can get a little nerve-wracking, while you wait to resolve for sure.
If that one other disk goes, then you're hosed.
Yeah, you're done, right? But when you're dealing with a 3-year-old RAID Z2 and one of the drives has failed and you start resilvering and all of a sudden 2 other drives in that same VDEV start saying resilvering, that gets kind of nerve-wracking too.
Yeah. Right.
You're like, I hope none of these blocks are the same because this is, this is going to be game over here. But ZFS is pretty good at that. Really recommend. Most of the problems with ZFS that we've had have resulted with neglect. We just had a system last week that we found 4 bad disks in, and fortunately the pool wasn't lost. However, when you start to get to a system that's been neglected to that point, it can become very challenging for ZFS to provide the redundancy and the resiliency you need. So, FreeNAS has the capability to set up periodic smart tests.
Sure.
And, smart is not the end-all, be-all whether a disk is working or not. But certainly if it says it's not, or if it says it's about to fail, it's time to get that thing out of there.
And, the other side of that is you have to configure the FreeNAS to be able to send you an email because, if you don't log into your FreeNAS, you're not going to see the alert otherwise.
That's right. So it certainly can get sometimes a little bit annoying to get those emails, but it's important. FreeNAS does a pretty good job of complaining very loudly when things are broken. And in fact, these days, most of the problem reports we get are FreeNAS was too vehement. It bugged me too much that something was wrong. Very rarely does someone submit a bug report and say, "Hey, this went wrong," and FreeNAS didn't tell me anything about it. And I've always been of the opinion that I want something to bug me too much, as opposed to something that silently fails. If we had a bug one time, it wasn't even that long ago. Like this guy's replication started to fail, and FreeNAS sent him 1,000 failure emails. Because he had like 20 data sets being replicated every 5 minutes, and it failed overnight, and it sent all these emails. Like, does it have to send so many emails? I'm like, yeah, we can fix that, but would you rather it sent you 1,000 or 0? I mean, if you had to have that bug, So
fail loudly.
So it does a pretty good job of complaining, for sure. And that's something that we're always working to dial in. I mean, there's definitely, alert fatigue. If something is going off all the time and complaining, you can become, jaded and not look at them. And we don't want FreeNAS to be in that boat. But definitely having things like failure emails working, or, there's a Nagios plugin that integrates with the alert system in FreeNAS. You can set it up Nagios to just monitor the API of the alert system and have Nagios send you an alert if the alert system goes off. Anything to get your attention. In fact, a lot of people use multiple methods. They'll have Nagios set up to send them alerts. They'll have the email system set up. They'll periodic check the GUI. They're really taking a multi-pronged solution to making sure that if something's wrong and FreeNAS is trying to tell them about it, that they'll know. So, but definitely setting up the smart alerts, setting up periodic scrubs in ZFS, There's sys controls that can throttle back the rate of scrubs in ZFS. There are people whose pools are large enough that they turn those sys controls up and basically just run scrubs all the time. So they're just always scrubbing. It's kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. They're always painting, right? They get to one end and then they just start back over on the other end, and just go again. And for some of those larger pools, they just accept the fact that we're always going to be scrubbing at 10% of our pool I/O all the time.
Sure.
Because they simply can't take the hit for we're going to scrub at 90% for 3 days. They don't have a 3-day window where they can take the I/O hit. So, but you really need to do that kind of stuff to keep the pool healthy. And ZFS, for good or for bad, it's kind of like an airliner. It's very, very, very safe. And when something goes wrong, when enough things go wrong, it goes wrong in a big way.
Sure.
There's very rarely, incidents with airliners that don't end up being a big deal. Because those things are already handled by the redundancy of the systems in the airplane. And ZFS is the same way. It can handle a lot of things going wrong, but when it finally reaches its tipping point, there's a crater in the ground. And so it's important to allow ZFS to tell you these things ahead of time, because it's going to yell and scream and say something's wrong and oh my goodness, but when it finally goes, it's gone. There is no I'll run an FSIC. There are no data recovery tools that understand RAID Z layout. I mean, you're done. So it's important to keep it from getting to that point. And when you do that, it's a very good file system.
Sure. All the thousands of developer hours that went into these features weren't just on a whim. This was well thought out to provide you the engineering and instrumentation of what's happening under the hood.
Right. I'm a huge proponent of open source. I've been involved in the open source community for a very long time. And there are certain problem spaces that just do not lend themselves well to a person working on something in their spare time. And file systems is one of those. And ZFS really had the benefit of having a commercial entity behind it and some real resources.
Sure.
And it still does to this day. And I think that, that really shows in ZFS. You've got the backing of corporations and real money that have spent some time. There's no way that you could have a ground up file system that could do what ZFS can do without commercial support and without real resources and without professional engineering. And that isn't to say that a professional engineer is any better or any worse than an amateur or someone who's doing it as a hobby. It's just when that's what you do and you can focus on it, it lends itself to better results.
Yeah, I think, ZFS is almost the example of both sides of it, right? At Sun, 1 million engineer hours went into it, and you got before anyone actually ever got to use it, it was already stable, and it's never been in the, it's not safe to use state. From the day it was released, it's always been safe. But then you look at the fact that since it became open source in 2011, since 2011, over the last 5 years, 45% of the code that's in ZFS now has been written since then.
Right.
And so, the corporate backing helped it get started and so on, but the being open source and being worked on by a bunch of these different companies that, their product maybe is based on ZFS, but the ZFS isn't their secret sauce. It's just the layer they need to just work. And so, they get the value out of open sourcing that and collaborating with all the other companies.
Right.
Well, they built a really good scaffolding and frame and everything, and it's easier, I think, now to then come in and say we want to throw this feature in or whatever. And,
right.
When you have a solid foundation to build on.
Yeah, ZFS has really evolved. I mean, I had one of the early Sun 4500s, the Thumper. The first thing to release ZFS on, and it could barely do Gig E.
Oh, wow.
I mean, you could barely write to the thing or read to it at 90 megabytes a second. And it was just, touted as this very secure, when you put things on there, you'll get it. And at the time, I mean, 24 500 gig disks, 24 1 terabyte disks, so you'd build these, 16 to 20 terabyte volumes if you were lucky, and you could fill them at Gig E, which took an eternity.
Sure.
there was no question about whether you could use that as a block backend for virtualization, or as a backend for your Exchange database, or or any of that stuff. I mean, it just wasn't feasible. It wasn't fast enough for that. And nowadays, you look at people that are pushing ZFS to 40 gigabit or 100 gigabit NFS,
Sure.
and iSCSI and things like that, and you go, well, that's a long, that's a lot of change and a lot of performance improvements. ZFS performance has continued to go up and up, and over the years, and it's really changed its role. It really started life as a tier 2, tier 3 backup, cold data storage, archival, things like that. And it's really become a viable frontline operating system for a lot of cases. And certainly the data integrity features, they show in an ultimate speed test of ZFS versus some other solutions when you're talking about writes, it takes a hit. Calculating parity, calculating checksums, compressing the data, all those things are expensive, and there's other file systems that don't do that. They just blast out ones and zeros. But the reality is that for a lot of applications, ZFS is fast enough. And so when you talk to somebody, you say, well, this ZFS file system will only write at 2,000 megabytes a second, and you've got some other choices that can write at 4,000 megabytes a second.
Sure.
However, you only need to write at 500 megabytes a second. ZFS is fast enough. And then you get all the other benefits that come with ZFS.
Yes, you're guaranteed that 2,000 megabytes a second you're reading is actually your data, not gibberish.
Right. Yeah, and that can be a big deal.
Yeah.
So.
Well, cool. Well, anything else you wanted to ask, Alan? I think we're pretty good here. I know Josh has a meeting to get to here soon.
Take up all your time. But thank you so much for spending some time with us and dropping in on us.
Yeah, you bet. It's always great to stop by and talk to you guys.
It's been fantastic. I appreciate it, and we'll let Josh wander on to the next thing.
Thanks.
And we'll be back in a moment. Okay, we're back. So, of course, thanks again to Josh for taking the time to spend with us today. But we got a news roundup to get to, and, of course, comments and feedback, and we're going to have all that coming your way here in just a moment. But before we begin, of course, the second sponsor this week we need to mention is a DigitalOcean. Website for that, digitalocean.com. And they've been with us for a long time now. Gosh, it's been several years now even. But you've even heard us talking about it. You know what DigitalOcean does. They've been offering FreeBSD. We've mentioned some of the new stuff that they have, the new FreeBSD 11.0 ready to go now.
Was ready with UFS or ZFS.
Yeah, with ZFS is awesome. So I think, if you haven't played a DigitalOcean in a while or haven't done it yet, you might need to go give that a whirl. And don't forget to use that coupon code FreeBSD Now, which will give you a $10 credit, which, if you want to run the ZFS droplet, that'll help definitely take a chunk out of the cost of that if you want something with more memory, et cetera. But if you're going to use their lower NVM, $5 a month, that's 2 months of messing around. We haven't even paid for it yet. So that's actually really cool. And of course, when you're looking on their website, be sure to check where all the data center locations are, because they have probably better locations that are faster to your physical location. I know for me, I would love to see an Atlanta one at some point.
Yes.
Hint, hint, if anybody from DigitalOcean's listening. But, the New York one's actually really fast. I think it's still 33 millisecond ping from here or something. So that's pretty darn good. But anyway, check it out today, folks. Anything you want to mention on that, Alan?
No, but they have lots of locations, even one in Canada.
Yep.
Works for me.
That is right. Yeah, they have Toronto, so it's good to go. So check it out, see what's close to you today, and get spun up with your new DigitalOcean droplets right away. Okay, so tell us about EC2. I guess they have their most dangerous feature that Colin Percival's telling us about. So what's he talking about here?
I guess normally something that might be covered on the show, but EC2's been in the news recently as we were talking about Colin and I working through a couple of bugs with FreeBSD's EC2 support. Colin Percival, who's FreeBSD's former security officer, I guess it was quite a few years now, he's also the unofficial maintainer of the EC2 stuff for FreeBSD because he uses it at his company, Tarsnap. But he's got a blog post up about their most dangerous feature. In particular, he says, as a FreeBSD developer and someone who writes C, I believe strongly in the idea of tools, not policy. If you want to shoot yourself in your foot, I'll help you deliver the bullet to your foot as efficiently and reliably as possible. Unix has always been built around the idea that system administrators are better equipped to figure out what they want than the developers of the operating system. and it's almost impossible to prevent foot shooting without also limiting useful functionality. So BSD tries to opt for tools, not policy. We give you the tools, you decide how you want to use them.
Yeah. Yeah, a hammer is a hammer, man. You can swing it any way you want.
The most powerful tools are inevitably dangerous, and often the best solution is to simply ensure that they come with sufficient warning labels attached. But occasionally I see tools which lack important warning labels, but are also designed in a way to make them far more dangerous than necessary. Such a case is the IAM roles on Amazon EC2. A review for readers unfamiliar with this feature: Amazon IAM, or Identity and Access Management, is a service which allows the creation of access credentials which are limited in scope. For example, you have the keys which can read objects from Amazon S3 but cannot write any objects. IAM roles for EC2 are a mechanism for automatically creating such credentials and distributing them to EC2 instances. So you specify a policy, and when you launch the EC2 instance, a role is attached, magic happens, and you end up with time-limited credentials available via the EC2 instance metadata. So each machine gets its own key instead of sharing the key, and that key only works for a certain amount of time. So there's that.
Makes sense.
And it says, this simplifies the task of creating and distributing credentials, and it's very convenient. And, Colin says he uses it for the FreeBSD AMI Builder AMI. So there's actually an image, FreeBSD EC2 image
AMI
to build the images, because there's a bunch of gotcha steps in there. You got to make sure you remove the SSH key so that when somebody else spins up one of the instances of this, they don't end up having the same host key as you did. He says the first problem is one of configuration. The language used to specify the IAM policies is not sufficient to allow EC2 instances to be properly limited in their powers. For example, suppose you want to create EC2 instances that are allowed to create, attach, detach, and delete elastic block store volumes automatically. Useful if you want to have file systems automatically scale up and down depending on the amount of data that they're going to contain. The obvious way to do this would be to tag the volumes to belong to a specific EC2 instance and provide a role which can only act on the volumes tagged for that instance. He said, while the second part of the limited action seems to be possible, there's no way to require specific API call parameters to the create volume call. So when an EC2 image is allowed to create volumes, it can create a volume that can be used by anybody. There's no automatic stuff at Amazon that says, if you have this access, any volume you create is automatically limited to use by only you. One of the handy things in ZFS is you can set it up so that you allow a user to create volume, a sub data set or whatever. And they gain the ability to delete that data set, but not any other data set. So that you can give them permission to delete anything they created, but not delete anything that they didn't create. And it basically lacks something like that. And he says, as problematic as the configuration is, a far larger problem with IAM roles for Amazon EC2 is access control, or to be more precise, the lack thereof. As Colin mentioned earlier, the IAM role credentials are exposed to EC2 instances via the EC2 instance metadata. If you're not familiar with how EC2 works, and most other cloud things, there's a website address, 169.254.169.254, which is in the a PIPA range. Basically, it's a range Microsoft owns that uses for when DHCP fails, you get basically a link local address so that any other machine on the same physical network you can talk to. So they use that address, and basically the instance connects to it with no IP address and downloads the data and gets information like its SSH, the SSH keys that should be allowed to SSH in, its IP address, its host name, all that kind of stuff. And in this case, it also gives it these keys to be able to interface with Amazon EC2. Colin says he presumes that the EC2 web server HTTP server, which responds, is actually running in another Zen domain on the same physical hardware, but that's an implementation deal and it's not detail and is not important. He says, this makes the credentials easy for programs to attain. Unfortunately, too easy. Unix is designed as a multi-user operating system with multiple users and groups and permission flags and often even more sophisticated ACLs. But there are very few systems which control the ability to make an outgoing HTTP request.
Oh, that would be a fun PF rule.
Yeah.
Right?
He says, we write software which relies on privilege separation to reduce the likelihood that a bug will result in full system compromised. But if a process which is running as the user nobody and is ch-rooted into var empty is still able to fetch AWS keys, which can read every one of the objects that you're stored in your S3, do you really have any meaningful privilege separation?
Oh, dude, yeah, that's a big deal.
To borrow a phrase from Ted Unangst, the way that IAM roles expose credentials to EC2 instances makes them very efficient exploit mitigation.
Right.
Basically,
all that work you did to prevent exploits is now meaningless.
Yes, because if anybody can run a script on your machine, they can connect to this IP address, get your EC2 and S3 keys, and have access to anything as if they were root on that machine. That they have this somewhat limited access to your entire Amazon account.
Oh, your entire Amazon, everything.
If you didn't limit it very much, then they can do anything.
Yeah.
Seems like that's a bad plan. This is, to make it worse, exposing credentials and other metadata for that matter via HTTP is completely unnecessary. EC2 runs on Xen, which already has a perfectly good key value data store for conveying metadata between the host and the guest instances. It would be absolutely trivial for Amazon to place this EC2 metadata, including the IAM credentials, into XenStore, and almost as trivial for EC2 instances to expose XenStore as a file system with standard Unix permissions can be applied, right? And make it so only root can read it or only the users you say.
Sure.
Providing IAM role credentials with a full range of access control functionality that Unix already offers. Of course, there's a lot of code out there that relies on fetching EC2 instance data from HTTP. And trivial or not, it would take some time to write code for pushing EC2 metadata via XenStore instead and exposing that via a file system and so on. So even if someone at AWS reads this blog and immediately says, hey, we should fix this, I'm sure we're stuck with the problem for years to come.
Yeah, it's hard to turn a big ship at a time, Yep.
Yeah, so he says, so consider this a warning label. IAM roles for EC2 may seem like a gun, which you can use to effectively and reliably shoot yourself in the foot, but in fact, it's more like a gun which is difficult to aim and might be fired by someone on the other side of the room snapping their fingers. Handle with care.
Attached to one of those clap-on, clap-offs devices.
Yeah.
The clapper. Ouch. Oh, man, that's a good one. But I guess that affects more than, obviously that's not just BSD specific,
right.
But if any of our listeners are AWS users, keep that in mind going forward. Okay, so I saw this review landed here. I think it was yesterday morning. The open source storage that doesn't suck. Somebody over at the register tries to break TrueNAS. So give us a little feedback on that. What did they do, Alan? I like to have you review that because I work at or talk about because I work at IX. So, not fair.
There's a guy at the register who's a storage reviewer, and he reviews many different storage products, and he got his hands on a TrueNAS. So he says, data storage is difficult, and ZFS-based storage doubly so. There's a lot of money to be made if you can do storage right, so it's uncommon to see a storage company with an open-source model that delivers storage that doesn't suck. And so they talk a little bit about what makes a TrueNAS different than your regular, open-source thing like a FreeNAS and so on. But in particular, they say, to become TrueNAS, FreeNAS code is feature frozen and then tested rigorously. Bleeding edge development continues with FreeNAS, and the FreeNAS comes with, without these extra guarantees that you get with the TrueNAS. But the big difference with the TrueNAS is that it's also tested on very specific hardware. It's basically only ever sold as an appliance because in order for some of these features to work, it's very specific that, it depends on having this card and that.
I can't tell you how big of a deal that is, though. So I work on the FreeNAS team now and just see all the bug tickets that come in, right? And I can't tell you the number of them that are more often than not, well, somebody built it themselves and you end up with a flaky controller or a flaky NIC or, with something that's not well supported and sadness ensues, right?
Well, in particular, the thing about a TrueNAS is that they're generally high availability. So you're going to have failover between multiple nodes talking to one set of disks. And all that has to work just right in order for it to function properly.
Yep.
Yeah. So IX Systems provided the register with a Z20 hybrid storage array. Z20 is a dual controller. So that means they actually have two 1U servers that do the logic. And then there's a shelf full of disks that they share.
Yeah.
It's SAS-based, high availability, and hybrid storage. So the test unit came with two 10 gigabit NICs per controller and retails for around $24,000. The unit shipped with 10 300 gigabyte, 10,000 RPM hard drives, an 8 gigabyte ZIL SSD, and a 200 gigabyte L2 ARC SSD. And I think 64 gigs of RAM with 50 of that dedicated to the ARC by the system's auto-tune feature.
Which, of course, you can tune as well.
So this review tested the performance of the TrueNAS and found it to be acceptable. Not exactly what they've seen other places because of all flash or whatever. But like we just heard from Josh, also, there is a cost to ZFS from having all this extra reliability stuff on top. But usually it's good enough. It
provides more performance than you're looking for, like a minimum level.
It's entirely possible to build a ZFS that will be fast enough. And do you ever want something that doesn't guarantee it's not going to lose your files or corrupt them? Like, really?
So it just seems like so long ago when we did PCBSD on UFS or whatever. And it seems like forever ago when we didn't have all that and we had to deal with FSIC and stuff. And it's just like ZFS has just eliminated those headaches. It's like, oh, that was a thing, right? We used to do that.
Well, I remember when having the fact that you can go out now from Seagate and get a 10 terabyte regular hard drive. I remember my hard drive from Seagate was 500 megabytes.
Oh, yeah.
But
that's crazy.
They also tested the high availability features by randomly unplugging NICs and so on and watching it fail over properly. They also took a look at the UI. They said, well, the UI wasn't impressive to look at. The functionality was definitely there, and they really liked the built-in help. They say, the UI contains truly excellent mouse-over tooltips that provide detailed information and rationale for almost every setting. An experienced sysadmin will be able to navigate the TrueNAS UI with ease. An experienced storage admin who knows what all the terms mean won't need to refer to the wiki or the more traditional help manual, but the same can't be said for the uninitiated. So they also talk about how nice the documentation is, because obviously with TrueNAS it's a lot easier because the features change less frequently and the UI and so on. But all the details there, so you can definitely get people on it. They also point out there's a wizard to get it to join your Active Directory domain and do all the setup. So even if you're, the next finish type of administrator, you can use the TrueNAS.
Yeah, you could very easily use that the first time and get yourself to a state where you're like, okay, I can do stuff now with this.
Yep. So it says, after a lot of testing, I'd trust my data to the TrueNAS. I'm convinced that it will ensure the availability of my data to within any reasonable test and do so at high availability solution. It's more than I can say about a lot of storage devices out there. This is IX Systems produces a storage array that is decent enough to entice away some existing customers from the likes of EMC, NetApp, Dell, or HP. Honestly, that's not something I thought possible going into this review. It was a nice surprise.
Well, we're glad to surprise you.
Yes,
good stuff.
It shows that while the open source software is important, you also need to pair it with the right hardware. Otherwise, there's nothing it can do,
Well, a lot of times you're only as good as your weakest link, right? And so you can have the best open source in the world, but if you're still running on a crappy controller, there's only so much you can do. Okay, well, very cool. Well, we look forward to seeing more reviews like that in the future. And of course, if you come out to the conference, say thank you to Josh, and a bunch of the other FreeNAS developers will be out there as well. And you can actually meet some of these folks in person in a few weeks. Okay, so next up, we got a couple of new OpenBSD news items to bring to your attention today. So first of all, for those who didn't know, OpenBSD development has, I think, always taken place in CVS.
Yep, since its start.
Since its inception. Of course, similar to NetBSD, and of course, previously FreeBSD was on CVS as well. However, today, Git fans can rejoice since there's now an official read-only GitHub mirror of their sources for public consumption, which the obvious URL for that is github.com/openbsd. Of course, since
for the source.
There's
also ports and all the other repos are there too.
Yeah, they have all their stuff right there. But since this is read-only, I will assume, unless they tell me otherwise, that they're not taking pull requests and whatnot. I don't know if they're going to... we've talked about doing some of that in the FreeBSD project, how to handle that, but I'm not sure if they've done that yet either. But, of course, this is still handy for some of the more Git-enabled among us who need an easier way to check out OpenBSD sources. I got to admit, Alan, I don't... when I run across a CVS thing, I kind of cringe a little bit. I'm like, I got to remember how to do that now.
In particular now, being able to search for a bit of code or just browse to a bit of code, the Git interface for that is much nicer than the CVS web that they had set up over at OpenBSD.
I can't actually tell you how often I'm laying in bed with my cell phone looking through a Git repo. Like, because, I'll be debugging something or thinking about a problem or whatever, and I end up on some Git repo on my cell phone. And then even the mobile interface is good enough to do that, right? And I don't actually have to be sitting at my desktop or laptop. So definitely good stuff. So, of course, they said there's also not yet a guarantee about the stability of the exporter. So if you base a fork on the GitHub branch and something goes wrong with the exporter, your data may be re-exported with different hashes, makes it difficult to rebase. So just an FYI for you. So, but definitely good to see that they're offering this. This is a good thing.
I think we'll get more people looking at the OpenBSD code and using it for things.
I agree. Okay, so for the second part on our OpenBSD stories today, we have a pretty detailed document posted over at libreboot.org with details on how to bootstrap OpenBSD or LibertyBSD, they also mention, using their open source BIOS replacement. So, of course, we've covered blog posts and other tidbits about this process in the past, but this seems to be the most definitive version so far that we've seen that you'll want to reference. So some of the niceties include instructions on how to get the initial USB images formatted, but also not just on OpenBSD. They assume you might be coming from FreeBSD, Linux, NetBSD, etc. So it's good to see they have some links to that. Instructions on how to boot without full disk encryption are provided, and they do have a section, kind of a placeholder, with a mention that so far Libre boot plus Grub does not support full disk encryption yet. Since I did a lot of the stuff on the Grub side with Jelly, I imagine somebody's going to need to do the similar thing with OpenBSD's full disk encrypto. Yep. Put the support in Grub, and then it could work. I don't know.
Because you'd have to get the Grub into the Liberty boot stuff or Libre boot stuff, so that could probably be even more complicated.
Yeah, there's some stuff that needs to be done there, and they ask if anybody's working on that to let them know, because I'm sure they'd like to update their document here. Lastly, they have some instructions, of course, on how to configure Grub and how to do some troubleshooting if something goes wrong as well, which is going to help round out this document. So, of course, give it a whirl and let us know if you're running any issues. So just as kind of a little editorial comment, personally, I find this Libre boot stuff really fascinating. I think it's really one of the last areas where we don't have full control over our systems with an open source system. So, of course, with the growth of EFI, it seems like now we're relying more on closed source binaries, even a mini OS of some sorts, just to boot our open source solutions, which I think needs to be addressed. So hats off to the LibreBoot folks for taking on this important challenge. I think this is a difficult one, but one well worth doing, and hopefully more of us can start to support that going forward. Okay, so last up here, before we get over to the Beastie Bits, we have a little bit of a FreeNAS tutorial about lags and VLANs. So I guess this is over on YouTube, Alan. So what exactly are they covering here?
Basically, it's walking through the interface to show how you actually configure the advanced networking features in TrueNAS, like link aggregation and VLANs. Although, the one caveat that Josh mentioned during the interview is that in the current versions, if you make a change here, it resets the network. That's only a minor blip, and usually you set these things up before you put it into production.
Before you start putting it in production,
if you do try to add a VLAN while it's in production, there will be a small hiccup in the network for about I think it takes about 0.7 seconds or something like that.
Yeah.
But the guide covers all the advanced networking features like link aggregation and VLANs, but it also covers each of the different modes of link aggregation and when you might want to use that one versus a different one, and the pros and cons of them. With regular link aggregation, you're hashing the outgoing traffic and deciding what port to put it on, and so that means even if you have two 1 gigabit NICs, if you're doing a file transfer between one machine to the NAS, you're only going to use one of the two NICs, right? Because it, just half the traffic goes over this one, half over this one, but you can't split one TCP stream across, right? So it's each different destination goes over a different NIC. Half the destinations go over one and half over the other. So if you have 10 machines pulling from your NAS, you can saturate both gigabit cards. But if it's just one or two, even with two, there's a 50-50 chance that both will end up on the one side of the pair, and you'll get 500 megabits each, not 2 gigabits. But that's not a FreeNAS thing. That's just how the feature works. That is how link aggregation works. Although, interestingly, there is the spec violating round robin mode, which allows you to just fire packets out of both NICs. And you can get 2 gigabits to a single destination with that. Although some switches will try to reorder the packets and put them back in order, and you will just burn up all the CPU on the switch and end up going relatively slow.
It doesn't. It may not do what you expect it to do.
And the other side, usually the switch will also be like, oh, both of these 1 gigabits are trying to go to, it does its hashing on the switch and decides both of those streams have to go out one port on the switch, and you end up only getting 1 gigabit anyway. But
so you just push the pipe down.
I've cheated by tagging VLANs to make those 2 ports, the 2 separate streams stay separate as they go through the switch, so that they end up on the other FreeBSD machine on the other side coming through. And so it is possible to bond a bunch of NICs and get all the speed between 2 hosts, but it takes a little bit of extra finagling and cooperation from your switch, or unless you actually manage to wire them back to back, and then you don't have to worry about a switch. I do have a pair of dual 10 gig cards I just got, and I want to slap in my 2 FreeBSD backup boxes and watch 20 gigabits go back and forth between the 2. That'll be fun.
Oh, nice! Is that your house? Fantastic. You still need to get some pictures of that for us, like show us a little bit of the Alan Jude's personal data center. Very good stuff. Okay. Okay, folks, it's time to hit the Beastie Bits, and of course we'll get to your feedback and questions in just a moment, but really quick, let's mention our last sponsor this week, which of course is Tarsnap. So if you've been with us for the whole show, you heard us talking about the EC2 security stuff, right? So that's Colin's blog who actually brought us that, and Colin's the guy behind Tarsnap. And if you have somebody who's that meticulous and helps find security vulnerabilities in the vaunted EC2 instances, you want somebody like that looking at your backup solution. So definitely you'll want to check it out today. The website for that is tarsnap.com/BSD Now, where you can go and take a look at how Colin put together Tarsnap, because it's actually open source. Open source in the sense that they release the source code. You can compile it yourself. You can audit it. You do what you like with it, and then get your own binaries. You don't even have to trust your third-party package repo, which is pretty cool. How many backup solutions offer that? I can't really think of any off the top of my head. And it does exactly what it claims to. It stores your data up in the cloud, but fully encrypted, where the encryption key only lives on your side. So if you want to delete your data, which you can't really go track down every single bit in the cloud, because who knows how many systems it bounced onto and how many systems it's been backed up to, and what, and so forth and so on. But Tarsnap means you can just shred that key. Toss away the key, RMRF that key, and you're good to go. That data can just live up there for as long as it needs to, until it finally does get recycled. And you don't have to worry about somebody. Yeah, that's right. Nobody's going to be able to read it or snoop on it, and Colin can't be forced to turn it over either. So if they give him the old rubber hose cryptography treatment, he's not going to be able to turn over your keys. So definitely trust your data to Tarsnap. That's what me and Alan use here. So we would highly recommend you give it a whirl today. And if you're used to using tar, I'm a big tar guy from way back. So the command line interface was super simple to use. So I definitely give it props for that. Okay, so Beastie Bits time. So we have a remote BSD developer position is now up for grabs. It looks like cybercoders. We have a link here. So what are they looking for exactly? What kind of skill set? I just got to look real quick. It's taking a while. It's redirecting over to Monster. Blah, blah, blah. There it comes. Looking for somebody with deep knowledge of 4.4 BSD. Looking for a storage architect. RLL, ESDI, MMF, disk driver protocol, SATA, PCI, etc. So if you are a FreeBSD expert who has some of those skill sets, definitely get in touch with these folks today.
The summary is the protocols to talk to hardware and device drivers, which control the hard drive and how data is written to the hard drives. So, if you're interested in storage and so on, and they say if you're a BSD developer and have experience working remotely, they would be glad to consider you for working for them. So, it's always nice when these remote positions comes up, because not everybody wants to have to relocate to, I think this one's in Miami, Florida, in order to work.
Sure. All right, so what about this next one, Al? It looks like Isilon's hiring somebody too.
Yes, so Isilon is looking to hire someone to work on FreeBSD security, to help out the FreeBSD security team, and also Isilon's products that are all based on FreeBSD and improve the security. And they say that they have offices at a bunch of different places, but also would consider remote a possibility. So if you are interested, you should check out the links here and send your CV or resume to benno.rice@isilon.com.
Okay. So next up, we have, it looks like over on GitHub, Google's ported over the networked real-time multiplayer BSD game. So Web BSD Hunt. Have you tried playing it,
I've
Alan?
never
I have
played
not.
Hunt on BSD before, but apparently somebody's ported it to the web server. So they have this here has the source code for it, and they show how basically it's to demo how to use Google Compute Engine and Google App Engine for all this stuff. They don't actually provide a link for me to click to go play it, though.
Yeah, that's
Like you can spin up your own instance and have a game.
I want to try it.
Yeah.
I want to try it. Oh, that's kind of cool.
Well,
though.
maybe someone will spin one of these up and send us a link.
Okay, there you go. Let's see. So next up, we have a link to a site here with a bunch of OpenBSD tips. So if you're looking to get some goodies here for your OpenBSD itches you need to scratch, definitely take a look at that. And also, we've been tracking the OpenBSD 6.0 limited edition CDs, and it looks like the last one has indeed sold. So too late, sorry. But if you want to know what the final number was, the last one went for $1,024.
Yes,
so
that's the right
pretty good deal. That is a perfect number. That's right. That's right. Okay, so next up, Dan Langeal, who of course is a friend of the show here. The guy does BSD Can. I guess he took an interesting picture in the airport the other day. So tell us, Alan, if you got that.
The Grace Hooper conference of Women in Computing, and he was just happened to be in the airport and looks up at the screen, which is usually playing, CNN Airport or whatever, and he recognizes a face on the TV. So that's George Neville Neal from the FreeBSD Foundation and FreeBSD core team in a show I have on YouTube here called The Entree, which is a little roundtable discussion show. And their topic in episode 2 here was cyber insecurity. And George Neville Neal had some interesting things to say about it. I think one of his bigger hard-hitting quotes here was that, let me just find it here. Sorry. The designing principle of the internets are open and means that everyone trying to connect to me, I'm going to do as much as possible to fulfill their request. That's a great idea for a research network, and that's a terrible idea for the modern internet. The way the internet was originally designed is like when someone asks you for something, you do everything you can to try to do that for them. And, maybe now with the way the internet is, it should be, if you don't fill out the paperwork exactly right, you're told that's wrong, go do it over again.
Yeah, off you go.
Kind of more like that in order to prevent the people from being able to make you spend a bunch of time and resources to try to get their request in shape to fulfill it properly, or for them to trick you into doing things you shouldn't, and so on.
It was such a simpler time back then.
But anyway, it's the video is only, I think, 3 minutes, so it's definitely worth checking out.
Okay. Very cool. Well, we also have a link here. It looks like Solo BSD is released version 6.0, built upon OpenBSD, of course. And it looks like it's a desktop spin of OpenBSD with i3WM as the desktop environment, but they also include a lot of other packages as well. So stuff like Firefox, HexChat, Git, Compton, Dunce, Scrot. I mean, a whole bunch of different things. So definitely check that out if you'd like to get kind of a pre-installed OpenBSD desktop right on your box. Okay, and then next up, Knoxbug are meeting next week, so October 25th, and we're going to be taking a look at PackBSD. We have a speaker coming out who's going to be telling us all about that and what that is.
What it was called before? It was the Arch
BSD.
It's Arch Linux with a FreeBSD kernel. Yeah.
Yes, I believe so.
So yes, here is what they call PackBSD or Pacman BSD. Is a rolling release of FreeBSD that pulls in parts of Arch Linux, in particular using their package manager and so on.
So if you want to find out more about that and you're in the Knoxville, Tennessee area, you'll have to come check that out next week. Okay, so it's time to get to feedback and questions, and we're going to go to Morgan first this week. So he says, hello, Alan has gotten me interested in FreeBSD through TechSnap, and now I'm trying to get my feet wet learning as much as I can in what little free time I have. Don't we all, man? There's just not enough time. But he says, I have some questions regarding ports and packages that I'm hoping you can shed some light on. My original understanding is that ports and packages should pretty much have the same version of software. However, I'm quite often find that what's in the port tree and on freshports.org is newer than what is installed as package, even after doing a package update. Is this what is expected, or am I doing something wrong or missing a step?
Okay, so there's two different things there. So at one point, yes. But then some defaults changed. So For releases of FreeBSD, there are actually 2 package repositories. We shifted the default to the one called quarterly. So this is a quarterly snapshot of the ports tree where the major versions of software don't change. We just include security fixes and runtime fixes. So the fixes required to make everything work, but you're not going to suddenly do package update or package upgrade and get a newer version of, say, Vim that changes all the defaults of what it looks like and messes you up until you move to the next quarterly branch anyway.
Then you can deal with that.
Then there's the latest repo. So if you can edit the config file or do a new one or whatever to switch to the latest repo. In that one, it's the ports tree rebuilt, but it's only rebuilt. It's a little bit more than once a week. It's kind of a best effort, so it's not guaranteed to be done at any specific point.
Sure.
But it's usually done 1 or 2 times a week. In that case, you're going to get a lot fresher and close to ports. Whereas
you'll be closer to ports. But remember, ports is the build framework for packages. Yes. So something is going to go into ports first, and then there's going to be some X amount of time before it shows up as a package.
So basically, ports is always a rolling release head development tree, basically. And then so the latest repo gets built from that on a weekly or more frequent basis, and then the quarterly branch is a snapshot of that has a bunch of extra work put into it, and it's cleaned up and tested more, and that gets updated only with security fixes constantly, and then in addition, once every quarter gets the big update.
Sure.
So if you want, you can check out the quarterly branch of the ports tree to have a ports tree that's more in line with what you would expect from the default packages, or you can change your package package config file to point at the latest branch instead of the quarterly branch and get packages that are closer to what's in the tippy top of the ports tree.
Sure. So, and then also you throw other things in the mix. Like, so for TrueOS, we may pull in ports pretty often, but we don't push a new set of packages except for maybe every couple weeks. And we do that intentionally, so we have time to run them internally here for at least a few days, make sure that things don't break, because it would really suck to push out a new ports tree or a new package set and find out Firefox is seg faulting or something, that people actually care about. So we have a list of packages that we try and sanity check before we push out, just for that extra peace of mind.
Yeah, and anyway. So next question is also, can you mix ports and packages? That gets slightly more complicated. It's
harder.
Yeah,
but
you can do it. It's safer when you're using ports and packages that are close together. So if you're going to use the quarterly packages, you check out the ports tree to match it, and then they'll be relatively in sync and you won't have problems. But if you're using quarterly packages and then the very top freshest ports, then there could be 2 months of differences in there, and things start to not line up and cause you problems. Says packages pretty much meet all the needs with the except for FFmpeg, which is missing the lame option by default because of license restrictions, or at least he assumes that's what it is. Could you have a system that has everything installed via packages and then build FFmpeg from ports? Yes, you could do that. Ports especially makes it a little bit easier because it has enough flexibility that when you're compiling FFmpeg, it will use, even if it's not the latest, whatever version of some of those libraries you have installed, unless they're not new enough. That's when you run into trouble. If you're using a much newer version of FFmpeg than some of the dependencies that were built in your packages, then it might say, oh, I need a newer version of libav codec. And your problem there is if you install that from packages, but a bunch of your packages were built against the old version, then you're going to break those packages, and then you have to build all those from the ports tree too. It causes you problems. And then the other problem with mixing the ports tree in there, you install FFmpeg from ports. Later, there's a newer packaged version of FFmpeg. You do package upgrade, and it's going to replace your FFmpeg with the newer one, even though it's built without lame support, and then all of a sudden your FFmpeg can't read MP3 files. But you can use package lock to prevent that, or a couple other things, and
I hate package lock. I
don't recommend that. It causes a lot of weird errors.
I don't recommend that at all.
Package doesn't say, hey, I'm not doing this because FFmpeg is locked. It's just like, nope, nothing to do, or can't do anything.
Right.
Or
it'll fail like on some weird dependency.
Yeah.
My advice is go look up a tutorial on Poudre and run everything through packages, but just build your own set of things you need.
Custom. Or if you use the TrueOS package repo, I think you have all the options turned on.
We have LAMP turned on. Yeah, we have a lot of things turned on just because this is what comes up, right? People look at the FreeBSD port tree and say, that's neat, but I really need all these flags turned on. And so we're a little more less conservative, I guess, with that. We like to turn options
off. So he asks, is there a simple way to build a port like FFmpeg but have it install the dependency from packages? I think that was a feature of Portmaster or something, but I don't really recommend doing that.
Well, I would love something, Alan, where if you're going to build a port, it would automatically install dependencies via packages.
Yeah, so I think Portmaster or Port Upgrade have that as a feature. I think Portmaster does.
Yeah. We need if there was a flag to the actual make system where you could just say make, fetch.
Well, the problem is that you're not going to have exactly the same dependencies possibly.
That's true. That's true.
Well, one of the eventual ideas was that when you do package upgrade and it sees that you built FFmpeg from ports, it would rebuild it from ports. So it would update the ports tree and then rebuild it with the options of the existing one.
Yeah, but that would really mess up a package upgrade if that goes sideways, right? That takes a long time because now it's going to stop and compile. Yes. So what you thought was going to be a simple package upgrade is now 4 hours I'm into this.
And then it's a little harder to revert as well compared to the other package. But he says, and then finally, in a mixed system of ports and packages, what is the best, simplest way to do updates? Oh, he is. There's not a great way, sadly. So like Chris and I recommended, the best thing is probably grab our tutorial on Poudre, set that up, and basically build your option of the quarterly branch or the latest tippy top of the ports tree, and compile just the packages you want with the flags you want. That's what I do for work.
Yeah, you control the entire life cycle that way. You know when you want to pull in new ports, and you know when you want to do upgrades of packages, and you know exactly what you're doing.
And it remembers your settings and compiles FFmpeg with all the same options next time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so next up we have Matt, who writes in about ZFS. He says, hi, I've been using ZFS since 2011 on Solaris and FreeBSD, but the one thing I've never really grasped is how to size ZFS deployment from a memory perspective. I know the mantra is more RAM the better, and while this is fine when I'm deploying physical servers, it doesn't work out well when we're paying per month for FreeBSD VPSs such as DigitalOcean. I've heard on your show that it depends on your working set and that 1 gigabyte of RAM per 1 terabyte of storage, but are there any formulas that can be used to calculate a safe but low memory provisioning for a given workload on disks smaller than 1 terabyte? Can you go lower than 2 gigabytes if the disk size is small? Does block size affect the calculation? And also, what ZFS tuning would you recommend in memory-constrained deployments?
I've never really had to do a memory-constrained deployment, so I don't have much advice for tweaking ZFS for that. But in general, yeah, so...
Hashtag memory poverty.
Yeah.
You don't have that
at all. I have RAM here. Well,
yeah, he just
got more RAM
everywhere.
And haven't got around to installing it yet.
Alan uses old RAM as toilet paper.
Something like that.
It's everywhere.
Not quite. But
Anyway.
I'm definitely not an expert at this particular thing, but, part of the speed you get from ZFS is that you buffer up the asynchronous writes into memory and then flush them out as a big, nice, fat, consistent transaction. And the problem with that is if you don't have very much memory, you can't do that very well. But you definitely have to tweak the sizes for that. Like the default is start writing once there's 64 megs of stuff to go out. And that makes perfect sense when you have 8 gigs of RAM. 64 megs isn't that much out of your 8 gigs. If you only have 1 gig, all of a sudden 64 is quite a bit. And so on. And there's a cost to a transaction. And so you don't want to be doing it too frequently either. And so you don't want to tune it too small. And I don't have any big recommendations. Now, while that 1 gigabyte 1 gig of RAM per 1 terabyte of storage is a good recommendation, generally that's 8 gigs plus 1 gig per 1 terabyte. And you definitely can't scale that down if you being like, oh, well, I only have 30 gigs of SSD here, so I don't need a gig of RAM. It's like, well, so...
You need as much as you can afford.
You could probably make it work.
So as much as you can get.
You could probably make it work with the the 1 gig DigitalOcean droplet, but if you can, I would definitely go for the 2 gigs.
Okay. Cool. Next up is Thomas. I know you replied to him on email here, Alan, but he asked about the FreeBSD path length limit. He noticed is 88 characters. He said that he's hit that on his backup server a few times, which is a little annoying. So I think, Alan, you said there's something in the works to resolve that down the road? I know.
Yes, I know 64 is a project branch in FreeBSD, although it hasn't been worked on in a little while. What's the name of the guy that did PEFs?
Gleb Kurtzu?
Yes. Gleb Kurtzu and Kirk McCusick worked on that originally. And basically, it solves a couple of problems. One of them is it makes the inodes 64-bit, which is important. Even though ZFS doesn't have inodes, ZFS exports your data most commonly over NFS. And NFS uses inodes. So without 64-bit inodes, that means you have 32-bit inodes. It means the most number of files you can have in your file system is 4 billion, which seems like a lot, but lots of people have more than that many files they're trying to export over NFS, and this causes problems. So 64-bit inode solves that for NFS, UFS, etc. They also went through and changed the path limits from 88 characters to much higher. I think even the max file name and like total path limit and so on. Because this one most often hits me on jails where I have the whole host name of the jail as part of the path name. And then you try to mount, user jails, puppetmaster.scaleengine.net/var/db/mysql. It's like, oh, that path is more than 88 characters. That's not going to work.
There was I hit this just a couple of weeks ago. There was something I had to check out from Git in the FreeNAS repo, and they had some really long patch, like a database migration, and I forget how many characters it was, but it was like a whole freaking sentence and a half, right? Of like, this is what this patch does. Please use it this way or whatever, like in the file name. And so Git kept failing to check out. Like, oh, come on. But anyway, yeah, that annoys me too.
Yeah, but this 88 character limit is mostly for the mount point, not necessarily the length of your max path, I think, is 1,000 characters or 1024. Yeah. But the maximum length of an individual mount point is 88 characters. And yes, this is how you end up mounting stuff under /u/ a couple of things. This is shorten the beginning parts of it a little bit to make it fit within that character limit.
IO cage was an offender.
Yeah, the problem with the inode64 branch is that it basically breaks assumptions that every program makes about the system, in that they expect a 32-bit number for the file and get a 64-bit number, and causes problems. So even if the work is all the way finished, it might be rather complicated to start using it.
Very nice.
The number of memory bugs that might be found in programs when all of a sudden paths are allowed to be more than 88 characters could be slightly daunting.
Okay. Let's move on next here. We have Sai who writes in. He says, "Hi guys, I've recently decided to be a good time to try OpenBSD on an old IBM ThinkPad T60 laptop. After upgrading to Lubuntu 16.04 resulted in me encountering the infamous Wi-Fi problems associated with that update. Upon reflection, I realized that since I use a simple desktop setup, which is FluxBox plus a gkRealm and a fairly basic set of apps, I actually stand a decent chance of being able to use OpenBSD as a desktop OS without too much pain. Generally speaking, this has worked out well. I was especially happy to see how HTOP runs on OpenBSD, but I'm still looking for a replacement for the NetHog's Linux tool. That's my go-to tool if I look over at gkRealm and notice that I have a lot of network traffic that I can't immediately associate with a request that I made myself. This is a single-user machine, so in theory, it should be relatively quiet unless I tell it to do something. NetHogs quickly tells me which programs and user accounts are responsible for the traffic and how much, and typically narrows things down very quickly as to what's happening. I'm not particularly attached to the NetHogs terminal GUI, but I'd like to know of a way on OpenBSD to quickly and succinctly get that set of information. Thanks for any assistance and for a very interesting and informative show."
I don't know many tools.
So I think you mentioned
IFTOP
as one.
IFTOP works kind of for this. So this tells you the source and destination IP addresses and port numbers, and basically breaks down your in and outbound traffic by the IP pairs and IP and port pairs. And then once you know the IP and port number, you can use netstat or sockstat to trace that back to the program. But it doesn't quite do it for you. Although someone might be able to build something like that by either looking at the code for IFTOP or something similar.
Good stuff. Well, hopefully, readers or listeners out there, if you have any other suggestions, send it in, and we'll pass that along in a future episode for you, Si. But yeah, if Top's my kind of go-to.
Yeah, because for me, it's
worked
like
well enough for what I need to know.
I only have 3 or 4 daemons running on the server, and I want to know who's causing all the traffic, not what.
Yeah.
Or I can tell what it is from the port number. Now I need to know who.
Same here. I can tell by looking at
what's happening. Oh, it's a FreeNAS update. That's why all of a sudden there's 8 gigabits per second being downloaded.
I love how it resolves IPs too sometimes, and so you'll see these weird addresses, and it took me a while to figure out. Oh, that's NTP doing its thing. Okay, because I'm like, I'm not talking to that system. What the heck? Anyway, I digress. Okay, so last up, you want to read here? We got Lars.
Yes, so Lars writes in, spelling both of our names wrong.
It's no problem,
It's right here on the screen.
You're gonna fail big.
Alan with 2 L's and Chris with a K. Anyway, I've been a listener since episode 1, and they're looking forward to EuroBSDCon this week. I guess that was a couple weeks ago, which they will attend.
Yeah, we're behind.
They missed a couple of editions since the Warsaw 2012 version. It says, in the next month or so, I'm planning to finally change my home laptop running Windows over to TrueOS. I have one question regarding this. What text editor do you use for your BSD-based laptops? Do you use a GUI-based editor, or do you just use like VI or Vim or whatever in the command line? Can you give me some tips and pros and cons for both, etc.? It says, I use a text editor for editing config files, my website, notes, salt, etc. Thank you in advance. Lars from the Netherlands.
I'm a VI guy, although I use Vim now just for the colors and whatnot. And I'm doing some Go code recently, and it's pretty nice in Vim. But I don't use graphical Vim. I just open up QTerminal and do all my editing through there. Heck, I take notes there. I do anything and everything. I even do outlines for my talks there before I switch over and do something in LibreOffice and actually do the slides. So that's me. How about you?
Yeah, for config files and stuff, I'm usually editing with just Nano is what I use.
You're not a Vim guy?
I can use Vim in a pinch,
but
man,
I need to harass you now.
I'm not a big fan of the Vim.
Let me show you. Josh Petzel brought me this, so all you Vim lovers out there will get this, but he brought me this as a little present. :W saves. That's going to go on the back of my car. It's a decal, which is why you can't see it very well.
My business partner, back when he was my professor, was always going on about VI, so I got him the mug of VI from ThinkGeek, which has a bunch of the keyboard shortcuts printed out on a coffee mug. But, he also brings up the other joke. He's like, I've been using VI for 20 years because I still haven't figured out how to quit.
Right. Well, here's the deal. So I had to learn VI when I started doing Open Server, and that was like all I had, right? So I hated life for a week, and now I can't live without it. Let's put it
I've
that
definitely
way. And
seen
I'm in the
people
process
do
of converting
amazing things with it. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't use it. I'm just saying that if I'm editing a config file, I'm happy with Nano. If I'm writing source code, I don't usually use Nano, though.
Do you have like some GUI?
When I like a GUI, I currently use Komodo Edit, which is, although it's much more useful on scripting languages. It does good for, like Shell, PHP, Ruby, Python, all that kind of stuff. Not so good for C, though. So I'm kind of in the market for something a little different. What I do like about Komodo Edit is that it runs on FreeBSD, Mac, Linux, Windows, whatever. It's based on the Firefox rendering engine and so on, so it's super portable.
That's cool. Wait, are you saying Firefox? No, never mind. Keeping that running has been a challenge.
Yes.
So we have, if you're going to be on TrueOS as well, there's a Lumina text edit, which is built in now. And my brother Ken's been working on that, and he's actually doing all of his source code in that. It has some highlighting and stuff, and it's pretty lightweight text editor without a lot of frills, but just enough color coding and stuff to make it easy for his particular workload. Yeah. So I know there's a lot of C++ in that and stuff.
Well, C++ works fine in Komodo Edit, just not plain C. As far as the completion stuff and so on. In general, the main things I'm after is it lets me be very pedantic about how I like to do my tabbing and so on. It's like 4 spaces is a tab, and 8 spaces switch to a real tab, because more than 8 spaces in a row is silly. That should be a tab.
True. True.
If you haven't seen that little YouTube clip from Silicon Valley or whatever, the show where the guy breaks up with his girlfriend because she uses just spaces and it's like sitting there counting the space bar.
No.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that. I'll have to go check that. Everyone's told me I should watch that show. I haven't.
Well, this
seen
is just one little clip of it that made me suddenly be interested in maybe trying to find that.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Okay, well, we appreciate you writing in, Lars, and hopefully you find one that works for you. Everyone has a varying opinion on that one. So. Okay, so we're wrapping up the show now, folks. So, of course, we want to remind you to send your questions, comments. If you have show ideas or topics, stories maybe that you want mentioned on the show, send that to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's the only place we monitor. And as you saw by that last question, we're actually a few weeks behind there, which is good. You guys are sending in lots of comments, so we're having to parcel them out throughout the upcoming week. But, so keep that coming.
It's especially useful when we're going to have to do 2 episodes soon to cover Meet BSD. So.
That's true. So we're going to have a double header here soon. So keep those emails coming, and of course stories that you find out on the net, or if you have responses to things we've talked about here, send those in as well, so we can cover that on a future episode. And we'll look forward to talking with you same time next week.